what I want to do is, and this again, this ties into our, cultural convictions, but it's problem solving. So I'm going to walk you guys through, some, I guess, some elements of problem solving, and then what we call the 7 R's of how to solve problems, essentially. And this is absolutely applicable for us as leaders and becoming leaders, because if you want to become a really good leader, you've got to become a problem solver, period. And so I extracted this. I wish I could tell you that I came up with this. I didn't. I'm an R&D guy, just like my pastor, which is rip off, right? So the first thing is that difficult times define a leader. Okay. We just have to remember that when we get in difficult times, which we're in right now, that this is what defines a leader. Okay. There's no way around it. It's defined me as I've gone through a lot of difficult times, personally, professionally, financially, health-wise. I remember when I was really, really sick, and I remember rolling over, and they had this little plaque on my wall that says "worth the wait," right? It was this reminder that I have to wait these things out and walk through them, and it'll be worth it on the other side of it. And it has been, as it's been one of the refining moments for me personally. The second thing is everyone has problems, right? There's no way around it. Everybody can pretend they don't, but everybody has them. To what extent, to each his own. But I remember Levi in the morning this weekend, I said, he was complaining about, his problems, things that he's not getting. And I said, let me help you paint some perspective. And I said, are you thankful that you have legs? He says, yes, I am thankful. I said, so you think they have arms? And he said, yeah. And I said, let me show you a couple pictures of these kids that have no legs and no arms. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I said, I want you to notice something on every picture. What do you notice? He goes, they're all smiling. Said, yeah, they're all smiling. Yeah. And they don't have legs and they don't have arms. Right. So I just said, everybody's got problems. Yeah. Okay. And it's good to remember that, put things in perspective. This third thing is problems don't disappear if they're ignored. Okay. Mm-hmm. You cannot, the way this world is designed is it will come up from the surface. My dad was a wonderful father. What he was not good at, which is probably the reason why I'm overly focused on it, was he was an avoider. And unfortunately, that's what took his life. He avoided going to the doctor, and he could have avoided having, he could have replaced his liver if he would have gone and dealt with it. But he had a chance to, he just didn't want to deal with it, right? And he thought it would eventually go away. And unfortunately, it took his life. But, so they just don't go away because you ignore them. They actually get louder and eventually could take your life, right? So we can't, they just don't disappear, and you can't ignore them. Okay. Does that make sense? Yeah. Agree with that? The fourth thing is you tend to lose a correct perspective of problems when they're your own. Okay, so so tell me if this isn't true. Whenever I have a friend come to me with a problem, it's just easier because it's not my problem. So I'm like, yeah, you just kind of do this, this, and this. Yeah. But when that same problem comes to my door, it's a big problem. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And the emotion changes. And so I always tell people now, after I give them advice, I said, just remember, advice is cheap. I said, I'm not the one in your shoes. So I said, take it or toss it. That's true. But the perspective of problems is different when it's not your own. This one's really good. Perspective of the problem, not the problem itself. Okay, so remember this, perspective of the problem, not the problem itself, determines our success or our failure. Okay. And here's 6 elements of that. Problems are solvable. So here's a perspective. Mm-hmm. Problems are solvable versus problems don't have a solution at all. Okay. So that's a perspective. Yeah. There's no solution to this. at all. In fact, I was listening to this and the guy said one of their leaders came in the room. They were dealing with a major problem. And the very first thing he said when he walked in was, I don't even know why we're here. This is unsolvable, right? Well, what do you think happened to the steam in the room with the rest of the leaders? It's like,
Yeah.
right? And he had to take, he said, I took 38 minutes to unpack that so we could get to solving the problem, right? Just that issue in of itself.
Mhm.
So it's a perspective, right? Number two, problems are temporary versus never ending. Okay. So it's like, okay, this is temporary
Yeah.
versus this is never going to stop.
True.
Okay. My kids do this all the time. This is never going to end, right? You hear that all the time. It's like, okay. Number three is problems are a part of life, right? You can't, like it's just versus like, I should never have problems.
Yeah.
And then we get surprised. How could that happen? And so perspective is just, it's part of life.
Yeah.
I walk in on Monday, guaranteed there'll be a problem today. Okay.
That's right.
Problems make us better versus bitter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You ever seen somebody that's bitter? It's just, that's their perspective.
Yeah.
They're better versus like, you know what, this could make me better. If I go through this, I'll become better because of it. Problems challenge us versus controls us. Okay, one is a perspective where you are victorious. The other one is you're a victim. Okay. And that's what I always tell our kids. I said, look, cotters aren't victims. You're victorious. We don't blame other people for our problems. You take personal responsibility and grow from it. Okay. And the final one is problems stretch us versus stops us. Okay. So think about those perspectives. What are your thoughts about those 6 perspectives about problems?
Yeah, I think your perspective and how you approach it is gonna define the outcome too. I think you have to keep that perspective of if you're not being the victim or this is an opportunity to grow. Otherwise, you just kind of get stuck in the mud. The help I'm stuck in the mud sort of stuff's going on, and you're not getting through it. You just look at it as something else to just keep you there, I guess.
Yeah, correct.
I also think like there's an attitude about it. Like if you're going to complain about a problem, you're not solving the problem.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
complain about it, but also knowing that you have a solution or you're working actively to find a solution. I always think that's a lot more respectable than just complaining about it and then just hoping that a miracle happens and all works out. So
Right.
but I also think attitude matters a lot. Where if there's a barrier along the way, like overcoming obstacles, that builds a new muscle and leadership even. So I think it's key.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's a great point from both of you. Remember the mud syndrome, right? If someone falls in the mud, they have 3 choices, right? They deny they're in the mud.
Yep.
Okay, so that definitely is not going to get you anywhere. They recognize they're in the mud, but they don't want to do anything about it, which is just complaining. I'm in the mud. I'm in the mud. I'm covered in mud, and everybody's like, "I want to get out of the mud." I'm in the mud. It's like I'm NASCAR. I want to get out of the mud. Jill and I we have mentored a lot of couples, and there was a few we finally fired that just they did not want to get out of the mud. They just want to talk about the mud. This is going on. This is going on. Finally, after about 6 months, I told her, I said, baby, we got to fire. We should do that. I said, it's not good.
Yeah, it's tough because you have this sense of like you care about them and you want to help them, but if they're not willing to take the effort to, that's a good point.
It becomes abusive, right? Like at some point, it's like, we're not helping you. We're getting frustrated. Nobody's making progress, right? Exactly. So yeah, and the final one is like, hey, I'm in the mud. I recognize I'm in the mud and help, right? Get me out of the mud, right? So that's when we grow ultimately. Problems responded to correctly advance us forward. These are God-given opportunities to grow. This is when we mature. The Greek word for problems, interesting, it means to throw or to drive forward. It's an interesting root in Greek, is it means to throw or to drive forward. And so that's interesting how the original Greek root word, it means to throw forward. So that's something that should drive us forward. And we'll never stay the same when problems happen, right? We'll either advance or retreat. It's one of the two, okay? But problems don't make it so we're not neutral anymore.
That's true.
The size of the person is more important than the size of the problem. So think about that. You know, it's just you saying, hey, I can handle this, and I'm bigger than this. I'm going to tackle it. And so it's important to remember the size of the person is more important than the size of the problem.
True.
The next one is some days are just difficult. Okay. Some days suck. And it's okay. You know, just some days you're going to go, okay. You know, Dan, you had a couple of these, right? It's like, okay, it's just tough. Just tough. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's okay. A problem is something that I can do something about. Okay. So a problem is something I can do something about. And then the final one is when you make small plans, expect small problems. When you make big plans, expect big problems. Okay. So it's commensurate with what it is you're dealing with. And just recognize that. So these are just some recognitions to think about. And then I want to have a conversation about these ones, which is the 7 R's. Okay, these are the 7 solutions. How do you solve problems? Okay, number 1, you got to rule your emotions. Okay, you got to get a control of yourself. You know, cool heads prevail. You just, if you're out of control, then you're not going to be in a position to solve the problem, because it's just going to suck the life out of you. You get sucked into it. I've been on both sides of the coin when I've been out of control, and you can't solve the problem. Okay, because you just got to get control of your emotions first. Okay, it says that a hot head and cold hearts never solve anything. Okay.
True.
Number 2 is remember what God can do and will do for you and me. Okay. So God is bigger than your problems, and you have to remember that. What he will do if we trust and rely on him. Number 3 is to refuse to give up. Okay. Sometimes we don't solve a problem because we just quit too early. And what he talks about is that if you start for the right reason, then you will keep going for the right reasons. If you start for the wrong reason, then you'll give up for the wrong reasons. Does that make sense? So it's important to know, like, why am I going into this? And if you have a deep why, that's the thing that keeps you going through difficult times, in order to not give up when things get difficult. Okay. What do you guys think about those 3 so far? Thoughts, comments? Rule your emotions, remember what God can do for you, and refuse to give up.
Yeah, I think that's important, because a lot of times, like from the faith standpoint, we're going to be challenged, and it's up to you to decide if you're going to walk away or keep going.
Yeah.
Right. So you can pick a path.
Yeah.
I think that's intentional, because it's not always going to be rainbows and butterflies. It's not realistic. So I think anything in life, it's not just work, it's personal, it's you know, family, a lot of different things that impact you know, problems, and how do we go about the, you know, who do we turn to, and how do we progress from that? So like I know for sure I'm stronger from what I experienced the last couple of weeks, but I also identified I need to make some changes, because this can't happen again. You know, it cannot affect. It affected not only me, but people around me, and that wasn't right. So I need to make sure that I'm better next time. So how do I improve?
It's great.
So
it's awesome.
I think the rule your emotions one can be very difficult, because when you're dealing with a problem, like, you know, sometimes you've got like problems that are like immediate, and problems that are like, you know, I may be able to get this later. And when it's like an immediate problem, I think that's where you can make like snap decisions. And that's where, yeah, you can create more problems by, just like knee-jerk reactions. So I think that one's, I know, yeah, there's been times where I've thought of like, especially like, sorry, car stuff, but with car stuff, it's like, scrap the whole thing, throw it away, start over, and then I'll walk away and come back like, oh wait, no, I could just easily do this. But in the
Yeah.
heat of the moment, you're just like, oh, anger.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's important to understand your own temperament and to have mitigating factors in place in advance to know when I am not in a good place, I don't send an email.
Mhm.
I know that it's not gonna come across the right way. I'll just take a timeout. I won't respond for a day, things like that. I had that happen with a guy who just sandblasted me when we were trying to sell one of our properties, and I almost responded that night. I was ticked. I was like, and then I didn't. I said, no, timeout. And then I didn't respond. I actually called them.
Mhm.
So we have to recognize our own weaknesses. Probably not good for me to chat about this right now. So, yeah,
that's a good point.
yeah. So we have that in our house. It's like, take time out. We'll chat about it later. Okay, number 4, refocus on the task. You have 4 choices. You can flee it, fight it, forget it, or face it, right? So you can take off, you could fight it, which sometimes makes it worse because you just, more resistance. You could forget it, or you can face it. We want to face things and just be open to what it is that we need to deal with. And it's just this idea of just being here where it is and just face it for what it is, not try to deny that. Realize your enemy's strategy. So if all of a sudden there's sort of a opposition, is like, what's the tactic? Sometimes you have to kind of walk through what's your strategy for that. Number 6 is rethink your strategy. A lot of times problems are just a wake-up call for creativity. And in order for you to think at a different level, you've got to think at a different level, right? You've got to start to think differently to rethink your strategy. Because I've had to do this in so many ways, even with the fund. I mean, we've had to rethink, like, okay, that's not going to work. That's how we came up with an A and B share.
Mm.
I was like, okay, we can't fundraise for $200,000 users because that's going to take too long. Right. And so all these things keep forcing us to come up with better and different ideas because of the problems that come up. And then the final one's just return to work. So just get back to work it on it, and don't be afraid. And so just, rule your emotions, remember that what God can do, refuse to give up, refocus on the task, okay, at hand. So face it, realize the strategy, the enemy, rethink your strategy, and then return to work. Those are the 7 things to solve a problem. And I would say the final thing is this. You have to really always have hope. And he says hope is optimism that takes action. Okay. So optimism is just, kind of you're excited that things might get done, but you're not going to do anything about it. And whenever you have a problem and you bring it to somebody, we want to make this a habit here, is have 2 or 3 solutions, right? Like, here's a problem, here's what I think the solutions are, because it creates a habit to just go, okay, I've got a problem, let's solve it. But here's a couple of different ideas that we can come up with, right? So, because again, this is super important teaching, because we got lots of problems, and they're opportunities masked as problems. So we just have to have a do we approach. So love to hear your thoughts, comments about that before we move on. Thank you.
I think there should.
Go ahead, Tom.
I think there should be a step 8 for celebrate.
Yeah.
For you should recognize that you've overcome your problem and
Yeah. Great idea.
pat on the back of
100%.
you know,
Yeah. Great idea. Great
Yeah, it's
idea.
like, it makes me think too, of like, you know, we ran into a successful failure last week where we had to innovate out of frustrate, right?
Yeah.
So now we're creating a strategy around like
Yeah.
identifying lenders to do construction loans,
Yeah.
or,
Right.
you know, so it's like the issue created a creativity element to
Yeah.
what we're trying to accomplish, and we wouldn't have done it unless it actually like hit us in the face the way it did.
Yeah.
So
100%.
sometimes you kind of have to learn the hard way. So it's a,
It does.
you know, so you to think differently, because
It does.
we would have never thought of that unless we had to.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Opportunities mask